You've landed inside Launch Street, the business innovation podcast, where we interview top innovators out there shaking things up so you can innovate, differentiate, and get further faster. Since you're here, we know you're the type of person that recognizes the importance of unlocking your innovation advantage so you can compete and win. And now, your host, the person that has worked with leading companies like Disney, Procter & Gamble, Aero Electronics, the U.S. Army Research Labs, and Red Robin on upping their innovation advantage, Tamara Gontor.
Hey, Launch Streeters, Tamara here, your host and the person who has a newfound love of magic. Not doing it, watching it. I just took my kids to a magic show and it was the best time ever. Okay, what does magic have to do with innovation? Well, sometimes I think pulling off an innovation win feels like we just pulled off a magic trick. But hey, you know what would make that magic trick easier? The right bag of tricks. Okay, I'll get off the magic analogy now, but I think you know what I'm saying. All this is just to say, I want you to have the best innovation tools, templates, and exercises at your fingertips so that you can innovate every day. Pull off a couple of those magic tricks at work. But you know what? It doesn't have to be hard. So if you haven't yet, go to our website, go to LaunchStreet.com and click on training in the navigation bar and check out our Innovation on Demand digital toolbox. After this episode, by the way, you're going to want to go in and watch the 3 videos we have about how to get buy-in for your ideas. I think that's where the magic mostly happens. It's going to help you tear down those walls of no that you keep running into. I think you'll find it makes innovation easier than pulling a rabbit out of a hat. Ha ha ha. All right, clearly I'm on the magic kick today. You get what I'm saying. Give yourself the tools to make innovation easy every single day. We've got those for you. Okay, for the podcast. Now, many of us struggle with the roadblocks of bureaucracy and legacy thinkers, squelching innovation. So whether we work in corporations, kind of in small business for ourselves, or as I guess does, in the behemoth that is higher education, we have to figure out how to navigate the system in order to drive innovation forward. So today's Inside Launch Street guest, Alexander Lowry, has some experience in this. So I asked him, hey, how do you pivot in an industry that wants to stay the course? Last year, he left JP Morgan in New York City and relocated to Boston to join Gordon College and launch the college's new 1-year Master's in Financial Analysis program. He wanted to prove that the old MBA model could work differently. So we talk about how to find the right customer willing to take the leap with you, which I know a lot of us need, why you need to push back on the institutions we work for, and how to move forward with your vision. All right, let's dig in. Well, Alexander, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
So, first time, what's the one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Well, it's a bit of an embarrassing name, and I'll blame my friends for coming up with it, but they call it my stupidity tour. My father was a world traveler, and I got that bug from him, and I wanted to see different things and go different places. And I've gone and done all of these crazy different things, like running with the bulls in Pamplona, or the world's biggest tomato food fight, or summer solstice at Stonehenge, Groundhog Day with Punxsutawney Phil. And you kind of get the picture. And my friends eventually realized they wanted to call this something. They call it my stupidity tour. Do
you have a favorite experience from your stupidity tour?
You know, I think the best one had to be running with the bulls in Pamplona. So it's about 4th of July weekend. And I mean, that's a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I knew it was the best was my father always had people over at the beach house 4th of July to celebrate. And one of my young nephews was asking his father, like, where's Alexander? Where is he? Why isn't he here? And he's explaining, well, he's in Spain. Why is he in Spain? Oh, he's with the bulls. Why is he with the bulls? What's he doing? He's running with the bulls. And he sort of scratched his head and he said to his dad, he goes, why is he doing that? And my father apparently yelled out from across the room, that's what I want to know.
Was it scary though? Be honest.
I did get knocked over by one of the bulls. It was really life-changing is a way to say it. So I did run 2 mornings. I only got knocked over the second. That was the last time I ran.
Yeah, my husband's done it. He did not get knocked over. And I like the idea of it, but now that I'm 45 and slightly slower, I'm like, I'm not sure it's a good, like I should have done it when I was in my 20s and bounced back fast and ran fast.
It's definitely one of those risky, innovative ventures you can do, but there's a time and a place for it.
I love it. I think that's great. So, Alexander, one of the reasons I wanted to connect with you is because, at Gordon College where you work, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but you push against the system that is education, if that's a fair way to say it. And, you talk a lot about that you contend that you don't need a traditional MBA to be successful. And that premise has set up a totally different type of program. I want to first better understand how you came to that conclusion, kind of what your aha moments were that led you to that place of feeling like, hey, you know what, this traditional way of doing it isn't the only way.
Sure. And I guess it probably started 10 plus years ago when I was thinking about when I would go to business school, just as what I assumed you do. That's what everybody does. You go to a top business school, you get a great job, and that's the way the world works. And I remember when I was studying for the GMATs and reading about it, I was finding books and people said, you don't need to do that. You can read the right books on your own and get out in the world. And I thought that's an interesting idea. But as you dug into it, you realize there's a bit of a stigma about it, right? There's very few, I'm going to call it a positive discrimination that an employer can have against people. And one of those is, do you have a college degree or not? You are allowed to hold that against people.
Right.
And a master's, let's just call it a general master's, is almost of that level. So JP Morgan, where I came from previously, for example, if you wanted to be a mid or senior level, you had to have a bachelor's, and it would say master's strongly preferred. And you might as well triple underline that. You wouldn't get a sniff of an interview without it. Now, you could have a master's in public health. You could have a master's in social work. Do you check a box? So to some extent, a self-studying MBA is an interesting idea, and you would argue maybe some entrepreneurs do that on their own, but there is still this association. You have to have something around it. But my question is, do you have to have the full 2-year traditional MBA that costs $140,000 tuition on average? And I'll pause there because I could go on and on about this. There's a lot to it, but that's where the beginnings of it came about.
So how did that then translate into thinking about the program differently? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but there weren't a lot of other best practices out there to say, oh, we should do it like those guys over there.
Well, that's a great question. We've actually tried to do it differently from anybody else who's out there anyway, but I guess there were two parts of it for me. So one is I'm studying at Wharton, and one of the best schools. This is fantastic. I went to Wharton to study finance. I wanted that pedigree. When people hear the word Wharton around the world, that single word, they know you're a finance guy.
Yeah.
And you get to Wharton, and like most MBA programs, your first year is all general knowledge. You are told to study everything: auditing, accounting, finance, operations, marketing. No matter whether you want it or not, they want you to be well-rounded. And it's only in your second year that you specialize. So the beginning of my career as a management consulting, I felt like I did that general knowledge for everything. I just want to do my finance stuff. Well, right. You got to wait till the second year. That's not the way the world works here. So that to me felt a bit limiting, right? You think about it in entrepreneurial startup mode. You just want to jump in and do what you want to do. The other part of it is the cost aspect. So the average MBA tuition is $140,000. The elite schools like a Wharton, you pay even more. There's a bigger premium for those. And you've got 2 years of lost salary where you're not working. That's a big chunk of change, which really forces people to go down, I'm going to call it elite paying job tracks, right? It does not allow,
because you got to compensate for what you just spent.
Oh, yeah. You're not going to come out and go into running a nonprofit to give back to the world, even if that's what you should do. You've got all this debt.
Yeah. So how did you know which areas needed to be changed? And the part of the reason I'm digging into this is because I'm really fascinated by businesses or programs that do a really good job of seeing those gaps in the traditional method that are causing friction, I guess, for the marketplace, for the consumer, and then changing it.
So that's a great question. Let me answer it by saying one of the other drivers of this. So if we go back 10 years ago, the anniversary of the Great Recession, I would think a lot of people, especially the common man out there, would look back and say, I think we could use some more ethical decision-making at the senior level roles. I think we could be making more decisions that are better for society rather than individual people's pockets being lined. And one of the problems with finance, the financial service industry, is there are these perverse incentives, whether you want to call them short-term or just high-end bonuses for individual people, that really can drive bad behaviors if we're not careful. To me, that was another big part of it, right, is a focus on that, an emphasis on that. Goldman Sachs used to have this term they called long-term greedy. And the assumption being you want to get money from your clients forever. You don't want to take all their money right now. They should be paying you forever. That's not exactly our philosophy, because greed should have have nothing to do it from the perspective we're coming from, but it is a long-term mindset of we are in this to give back not only for ourselves and our shareholders, but society, and we can all benefit together.
So I want to ask you more about the ethical decision-making, because I remember when I was doing my research on you, I looked at that, I was like, well, that's interesting. And there was a part of me that thought, well, shouldn't it all be ethical? I mean, it's finance, obviously. And then I remember very clearly the moment that 2008 really hit home for me. I mean, I think those of us who really lived through it will never forget that year and the pain that it caused. But so from your perspective now, what is ethical decision making, and why do we need to actually put a spotlight on that versus thinking what I thought for a moment there, which was, but wait, isn't that obvious?
So it should be obvious in theory, right? And let's say you've got choice A and B, which one is more ethical, which one is ethical versus not ethical. In theory, it's basically the way my father's phrase, I'm always told he talked to colleagues, was just do the right thing. In theory, That's the ethical decision. You're just doing the right thing. In absentia, in a vacuum, like they talk about in physics, that's easy. You just know what the right thing is. You sit back and look at it. But that's in the cold light of day. Sometimes under intense deadlines or when there's huge incentives on the line, it's easy to take the wrong decision. So I'll give you an example. So at Wharton, we had an ethics class, of course, and the professor had been teaching it for 40 years. So imagine the first class, he walks in the room and you got 90 students chatting and talking and having a good time. He walks to the front of the room, throws down this huge manila folder on the table, makes this giant thud. Clearly, he gets the whole class's attention. Everybody turns and looks at him, and he points at the folder and he says, I've been teaching this class for 40 years. All the people in this folder are my Wharton students who've gone to jail.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, I'd like to not add to it this class.
Oh.
now, this is where people will go off the rails. Oh, Wharton's terrible. But these are your uber capitalists, right? So to some extent, they push the boundaries. I get that. But to me, that gets the point. He's been teaching a class for 40 years. All of those people took his class. But just because you took a class doesn't mean you embodied the class.
Yeah. So how do you teach it? In your program, how do you teach it in a way that actually gets it to stick? Or how do you focus on it in a way that actually doesn't add to that manila envelope? I mean, what a great example.
Well, and that's exactly what we talk about it. When our leadership in ethics class starts, we have a manila envelope. We come in, it's empty, and we go, we're never going to put any students in this folder. Now, part of it is clearly the Christian worldview, because Gordon comes from an evangelical perspective. That's an aspect of it. But I think part of it is also self-serving. So you think about the kind of students who want to come to a program like this versus maybe some of the kind of students who want to go to Wharton and want to push things on a certain level. So I don't know that we are going to necessarily solve all the world's problems, because I think that self-selects at the door to some extent. But there's no question that will be a theme that resonates throughout all of our classes. I mean, you will see it as a motif no matter which of the 12 classes you take. That ethical decision-making will come up again and again. So it's not just one class like we did at Wharton. It's actually all of our classes here.
Now, just very high level for listeners so they understand, because we've talked about how your program is different. But if you were to just lay out the kind of top bullet points about what makes the program different, will you just walk us through it? So you've got traditional MBA, we get it, certain amount of years, certain amount of time, right? You kind of have to go for it, then you get all this debt. How would you describe your program?
So we think about it as a one-year master's in finance. And the way it's generally suited is if someone knows they want to be in finance. So for example, we talked about an MBA program. You come in and you do a lot of general knowledge and then you specialize. The assumption being you will use your summer internship to make a career change. That's why most people do it. You will come to our program knowing, hey, I want to be in finance and I want to get that specialist degree, or I want that edge so that an elite company will look at me and I've got that same technical knowledge I will finish with as Wharton or any of the other great schools would give you. You do it in half the time for less than a quarter of the price. You come out with different debt, which allows you to make different decisions.
That's great. I think what you said right there, in fact, I just recorded another interview with a woman and we were talking about the debt with school. And another guy actually who's a veterinarian who was talking about he walked out of school with $100,000 debt and then was told to get a $40,000 job because that's the path. I was like, I'm not sure about the math on this. I got to figure out a different path. Yeah, that is a big part of the decision making. I'm curious, because you've done things differently and you've really put a spotlight on some things that weren't working and tried to change them, as well as some things that were really problematic, and tried to fix those. What types of pushback, if any, have you received from traditional programs or the institution that is, MBA and academia?
Well, there's clearly an upturned nose on something like this from an elite school. And frankly, I'm more of a gnat on their windshield from their perspective. And they've got some most amazing professors. They do phenomenal research. They put out really smart people that can change the world. And that's fantastic. But it doesn't mean everyone should go that route. The way that I tend to think about it is, I don't even think everyone should go to college, even though that's what we tell everybody. Like career and technical education is the perfect for a lot of people because it might be faster or cheaper, or it works with what their skills and their interests lie in. In the same way, I think for this program, right? You can develop a better mousetrap and it's going to work for certain people. Our program's not for everybody. If you have no idea what you want to do, an MBA program might be great because you get so much different exposure, but we want to give an alternative approach and philosophy for the people who it is a right fit for.
What type of students do you think you attract? I mean, I get that they want to focus on finance, but more from a psychographic perspective, I guess.
So I can envision two different types, and there's people that will come direct from undergrad, and then people that come maybe 2 to 7 years out instead of an MBA program. So direct from undergrad, you got people that were math or physics majors, quantitative people who realize maybe senior year, oh, you know what, I don't want to get a PhD and I don't want to teach, but hey, Wall Street loves quants. So if I go get the right technical background, someone will realize I've checked a box and they'll hire me. In the same way, history or poli-sci majors, I was a history major. I loved the idea of business, but I was just enjoying what I was studying. This was what I loved to do, to read. And I'm sure we're going to talk about my type later, right? The inquisitive type, studying all that stuff. So that fit for me, but I would have needed a program like this to make that bridge, because the reality is, you look at, I'll come back to Wharton again. Wharton is the only undergrad Ivy League business school, and they produce the best of the best. That's who you're competing against. So if you don't come out with a degree against that, it's much easier for JP Morgan to say, well, I'll take the Wharton kid because they're up the learning curve.
Right. So it's super interesting. So I have like 7 questions in my head and they're all getting jumbled right now, which is then I'm like, which one do I ask first? I actually, I want to ask you about something that you guys talk about, which is transforming, accelerating, and advising businesses that students want to work for. What does that mean and how do you do that?
So when I think about what I do in my life, I've kind of got 2 parts now. And where the main job we're talking about now is leading this master's program and teaching in it. But in addition to that, I've got my board roles. So this goes back to my management consulting days, where as a 22-year-old, you are getting ridiculous access working with executives. You have no reason being in the room talking about their strategies, but yet you are, which was a great proving ground. And I realized that was the type of work I wanted to be doing, helping them and coaching them and guiding them. 20 years later in my business career with some board experience, I'm now well situated to do that. So part of what this role did was it gave me that work-life balance where I can do the academia stuff and have time on the side for working for for-profit companies on their boards.
I want to dig into you a little bit, Alexander, if that's okay.
Sure.
Because I think the program's fascinating and it takes a type of person, I'd say, to leap and kind of dig and go that path of, hey, let's do something totally different and take a different trajectory. You left a pretty cushy job on Wall Street for academia. Why make that leap? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but don't most people go the other way around? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
People do it for personal reasons, and this one was very personal for me. So part of it, I come from a family of educators, right? My parents are both professors, so this was not a pushing the boat out too far for me. But on the other hand, I coming up on my 2nd wedding anniversary, and at the time when my wife and I had just gotten engaged, and I'm working 100 hours at a bank, and she's going, I don't think this is what I'm signing up for. I don't think this is going to work for us. We're talking about having a family, and I don't like this idea. So we began to think about maybe there's something we could do differently that still works with my skill set. So we're talking about board roles like financial services, fintech companies, all leverages what I was doing at JP Morgan, as does this program. But we've just been able to move up here, and we've just had our first child. We live in a beautiful area. We've got much higher quality of life. I can actually be home for dinner every day if I need to. No one's going to be upset with me. I can do work again at night afterwards, but there are some big perks to it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think it took some of us, I don't know about maybe you, not as much time as me, but it takes some of us a little bit longer to realize that work is not separate from personal, and we've got to make those decisions based on our life in total, not just, one thing versus the other. And I don't know if you feel like this, but I was at a point one time in my life when I was in advertising where I thought, if I just get to this point in my career, then things will slow down. Like I just need to work hard now and then I won't later, but it never slowed down.
And the more senior you get, the more responsibility you have, and it never becomes easy. For me, it's work-life integration. There is no separation between that. Otherwise, it implies there's a scale and there's balancing. One loses and the other wins. That's not how I do it.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually try to avoid the concept of balance, or when people ask me about it, because I don't think there's balance. I think you're right. I think there's integration, and some days have different priorities than others. It's a little bit of a teeter-totter. Like some days work has to take a little bit more priority for me, and other days it doesn't, and family takes a priority. But it all depended on what's going on that day.
Totally with you.
Yeah. So you had said about reading and asking all these questions. I want to talk about that because your innovator archetype is risk taker and inquisitive. So just for the launch readers listening, that means that Alexander innovates by leaping and figuring out. That's the risk taker. It's being okay, being uncomfortable and really innovating in those moments. But the inquisitive side, which you alluded to, that's the part about digging into those assumptions and challenging things and, innovations in the questions, not the answers. I'm wondering, when you are asking those challenging questions like, why traditional MBA? When you're in that inquisitive side, when you're innovating in that way, what is your thought process? What goes on in your head?
I guess I should give you a little bit of background, and I'm going to channel my wife here. So my wife would answer this and tell you that, talking about me, she said, what he likes to do is figure out exactly how a system and process works, sort of ... so that he can figure out a way around it, right? So I want to know how it works. And not necessarily loopholes, but it's like then you can figure out the better mousetrap or what the opportunity is. And I guess that's the innovator side of me, thinking about what's a company that could step in here and make $1 million because no one has figured out this is the piece that matters. So for me, it was the same thing about the MBA. So I'm at one of the best schools. I'm getting this amazing degree. I'm spending all of this money. I'm making these great connections. Is this the way it has to be? I mean, I realize this is a factory, right? They churn out. Wharton has 96,000 alumni. It's clearly a very successful model. People will pay for it again and again, and it's just that competitive. But to me, it was like, there's got to be an opportunity here for something different that can challenge us.
I love that idea of first figuring out how it works and then kind of reverse engineering it for the opportunities from there. I think, it's funny that you say it that way. I think all too often we leap so quickly to poke holes and solve it that we actually miss the bigger picture. We miss where the real opportunity is. Can you, I'd just be curious if you have one, give us just a snapshot, a brief example of a time that you've done that. I get it with the MBA big, but like just one little thing that maybe you kind of went through that process with.
Well, I suppose that would happen in your personal life as well, not just necessarily in the business world. So as I'm thinking about it with my wife, imagine we're thinking, okay, we're going to leave New York City, which is insane, and we're going to leave banking in New York, which is crazy in and of itself, and we're going to go somewhere else. Where do we want to go? What do we want to do? Do we move by a family? Is that going to be happier and closer when we've got support to raise a family? Where would you go in the country that's going to be the highest quality of life? And you're looking at what all of your friends did and how they went about it. And you step back and realize, no, they've got different assumptions. They've got different values. They've got different approach. And you have to go back and reassess your own and challenge it. But you're thinking about not only today, but I'm picturing 5, 10, 20 years down the line. So we've just had a child. Ideally, we'd be in one place and they'd go to one set of school systems. What am I going to want then? What are they going to want then? How is that going to work? I don't know that I'm a good futurist, but you're sort of trying to picture it from a different perspective than I have in the past. Because before, it was always about my career. What's my next step and how do I get there? But now I'm stepping outside that box to think about more than just myself.
What you just said totally nails it about, challenging your own assumptions. I think people who have inquisitive as their power trigger tend to be really good at challenging not just assumptions in general. Why do we do things this way? Why is the MBA the way it is? Why do I have to do this track? But also, hey, wait a minute, let me challenge my own assumptions. Am I even coming from the right place? And I'm sure you've seen for your own life, I think that's where the innovation comes from. That's where you start to see things differently and come up with different solutions, see all those opportunities because you're not stuck on one path just because, well, here's where I am. This is where I started.
Right. Absolutely.
So before we kind of get into final questions, where can people go to learn more and connect with you?
So Gordon's website, gordon.edu/graduates/finance is our website. And the email address, very similar, related to that, graduatefinance@gordon.edu. My wife would tell you I have my phone inserted electronically attached to my phone.
Available all the time.
Yeah, I respond pretty quick.
I want to loop back and actually ask about the graduates of Gordon because we've talked a lot about the program being different, them attracting maybe a different type of person. I'm curious, what are you hoping happens for these new graduates coming out of this different type of program? What are you hoping happens that's different than maybe those coming out of the traditional?
So I can envision two things. So let's imagine one of our graduates 2 years from now gets a job in Boston. He's working at Fidelity or State Street, and the person sitting next to him is straight out of an MBA program. Let's take a good local one, HBS. And they're sitting there side by side, and midnight rolls around, and you're both bored with the stupid projects you're working on. So you start talking about real life, because that's when real life happens at midnight.
That's right.
Then the HBS guy just sort of lets out. He goes, I've been watching you and I've been kind of judging you, thinking you didn't go to great school like I did, but I respect you. You got the same technical knowledge I do. To be on that same level, that would be a success for me. Like we are putting out students in that way. And then the other part of that is 5 to 10 years down the line. So it'll take a certain amount of time. You'll have people who finally get out there and are in leadership positions and mentoring others and coaching and developing and putting more of our graduates into the top tier companies. That would be incredibly exciting and impactful for me.
I love that. And you just gave me a flashback memory. I started my career in advertising on Madison Avenue, New York City, when Madison Avenue mattered. Doesn't anymore the way it used to. That industry's changed. At Y&R, which was the second largest global company. And I was account coordinator, which means I was the lowest of the low of the low. And the best conversations happened at midnight on that. We were all on the same floor. They put all of us 21-year-olds on the same floor with open cubicles. It was just a disaster in some ways, but that's when those great conversations, it was always midnight. We were all burnt out from whatever it is we were doing. And that's where we talked. But the other thing I have to say on that, because I think it actually relates to Gordon. It just makes me smile thinking back to it. I got very lucky early on to be put on a team with a group of people who were we were like, if you watch Battlestar Galactica, we were the ragtag fugitive fleet. We were the instigators, the disruptors that nobody wanted to deal with at all different levels. So they put us all together. But because we didn't do things the way everybody else did things in the business, our results were amazing. And I had the best mentors on that, Anita May and Stuart McLean. I mean, the two best people in the world. If you're out there listening, I still love you guys. But I think there was something in kind of a little bit what Gordon is doing and what you're doing and saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't have to do it like everybody else. Let's figure out the better way to do it for the people that we serve. And because of that, we were wildly successful. But anyway, total side note, but you reminded me of all that.
That's a great little anecdote that I touched that for you. That's really
yeah, no, it just totally came back to life vivid for me. I was like, oh my God, Madison Avenue, 1:00 in the morning. So my last question for you is, what's one piece of advice you'd have for launch leaders out there looking to challenge the systems that they're in and do it in a way that kind of solves the problems the way you've thought about it?
I think the summary advice I'd probably give is a couple pieces rolled together the way I would think about it, right? You're going to start with something that you're passionate about or you have a conviction for. I think when you bring that energy and that enthusiasm, it changes the game. It doesn't matter if it's a great idea. If you don't care about it, I think it's less likely to be successful. I think you then shore that up with determination. So, strong enough to endure the inevitable challenge and obstacles. You think about like startup mode, right? There are definitely going to be hard times. And after that, you want to put down the pen and you want to pick up a hammer. What I mean by that is that you want to stop theorizing. You want to start doing, right? The best entrepreneur, in my opinion, learn on the job.
That's your risk taker side, by the way. Risk takers are, I'm an experiential, so I innovate by doing, but I'm also a risk taker. Risk takers are like you, are very keen on, we got to push the boundaries, but we actually got to do it. We can't just think about it. It's not enough to think about it. We got to actually put our stuff into action and see if it works. So I think that is great advice. So Alexander, thank you so much. I'm really looking forward. Maybe in a little bit, we can have you back and we can talk about some of those success stories and the progress that you've made, because I know, as you know, that as you start a new venture and try something different, your job's not done when you launch. There's a marathon ahead.
Well, Tamara, was a pleasure. I'm glad to be with you today, and I'd love to come back and share more with you in the future.
All right, before you go, tell me, what's your one big takeaway from the episode? For me, it was the fact that any industry, no matter how set in its ways, has room for innovation. It also has room to be disrupted. Now, I know many of you are innovators inside legacy systems, fighting the good fight. Yay! Let's make that fight easier for you. In our Innovation On Demand platform, there are 3 quick videos around how to get buy-in for your ideas. There's open questions, pain and possibility, what's in it for them. What I want you to do when you're done driving, listening to this podcast, is I want you to log in and I want you to watch those videos and put that into action the next time you need to get buy-in for your brilliant innovation and ideas. It's that simple. What I've discovered, and you'll hear about in the videos, if you change your language, you change your outcomes. Let's do that. Tamara, out.
Thanks for hanging with us on Inside Launch Street. If you know someone that is truly ready to unlock their innovation advantage, have them join you on Launch Street. Discover your innovation advantage. Build a team of high-performing innovators and ignite ideas and solutions that create massive impact. GOTO, LaunchStreet.com. Remember, innovators, if you don't take the leap, somebody else will.